My son locked the basement door from the outside and drove away with his wife to a ski resort while I lay on a concrete floor with a broken wrist and a lung that felt like it was full of gravel. I am 67 years old. In January, in southern Ontario, that basement was not much warmer than the ground outside. But in the 3 minutes before I lost consciousness, I found my phone in the pocket of my flannel shirt and made one call. Everything that happened after, the financial collapse, the public humiliation, the legal reckoning, all of it began in that call. They thought they had buried me. They did not know I owned the shovel. My name is Roland Mercer. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with a firm in Guelph, Ontario. I built infrastructure, highways, drainage systems, municipal bridges, projects that will outlast everyone involved in them. When I retired at 63, I had a paid-off home in the west end of Guelph, a lake property up near Georgian Bay, a healthy RRSP, and a numbered holding company, 4172 Ontario Holdings Limited, that managed a portfolio of income properties I had accumulated quietly over 2 decades. I was not wealthy in the way people display at parties. I was wealthy in the way that means the worry is permanently gone. My son moved back into my home 3 years ago with his wife. He was 34 at the time. She was 32. They told me they needed 18 months to stabilize their finances while he focused on building his new business. I said yes, because that is what fathers do. I gave them the master bedroom. I moved into the small room at the back of the house that I used as an office. I cleared out my dining table and put a single bed against the wall. I paid the utility bills, the property taxes, and the weekly grocery run at Zehrs. Every Sunday morning I made breakfast. Every Sunday morning my son sat at my table scrolling through his phone while his wife slept until noon. He had a franchise business, a sandwich shop in a strip mall on the south end of the city. He talked about it the way some men talk about their children, with a pride that edged into obsession. He used words like scalability and brand equity at dinner. He told anyone who would listen that he had secured significant capital from a private investor, that the operation was growing, that he was on track to open a second location within the year. He said this with the self-congratulatory confidence of a man who believes he built something with his own hands. He had not built anything. He had built it with my money, through a structure he did not know existed. 3 years earlier, my son had come to me very late on a Tuesday night. He was 31 years old, and his franchising application had been approved, but the required capital was sitting just out of reach. He needed $240,000 for the franchise fee, the fit-out, and 6 months of operating reserves. He asked me directly. I told him I would think about it. I had already been thinking about it for weeks. I knew my son's relationship with money. I had watched him spend what he earned and borrow against what he had not yet received. I did not trust him with a direct transfer in his own name, but I also did not want to humiliate him by saying so. So I called my lawyer, Oliver Crane, a man I have worked with for over 20 years, and we spent 2 afternoons designing something more careful. We used 4172 Ontario Holdings Limited, already registered and operational. Oliver drafted a formal investment agreement between the holding company and my son's franchise business. On paper, my son had secured private capital from a numbered company he could not trace back to anyone he knew. The agreement included standard shareholder protections and, buried deep in the commercial clauses, a conduct and ethics provision that Oliver and I had worded with considerable deliberateness. It stated that any criminal charge, finding of moral turpitude, or substantiated act of elder financial abuse or physical harm directed at a person over the age of 65 would constitute an immediate and material breach. Upon such a breach, the holding company held the unilateral right to call in the full investment, cancel the franchise arrangement, and assume operational control of all business assets, pending repayment. My son signed the agreement without reading past the dollar figure on the first page. He called me that evening to say he had closed his financing. He sounded like a man who had just conquered a mountain. I congratulated him, poured a glass of rye whiskey, and went to bed. That was 3 years ago. In the time since, the business turned a modest profit. My son hired 2 part-time employees and started talking about opening in Kitchener. His wife redid my front room without asking, replaced the curtains with something she preferred, moved my late wife's photographs off the mantel to make room for a large mirror she had bought. When I mentioned it, she said the original arrangement felt cluttered. The argument that ended everything began on a Thursday evening in early January. I had been in the basement workshop all afternoon, refinishing an old chest of drawers I had found at an estate sale up in Elora. I came upstairs carrying a can of wood stain, and my son was standing in the kitchen holding a folder. He told me he had been to see a lawyer. He said he and his wife had been discussing my situation for some time, and had concluded I was no longer managing adequately on my own. He used that phrase, managing adequately. He said my house was too large for a man of my age, and that the Georgian Bay property was sitting idle. He opened the folder and pushed 2 documents across the counter toward me. One was a general power of attorney over property. The other was a transfer of title form for the Guelph house, already partially filled in with my name in the appropriate field. He told me it made more sense for the properties to be held in his name, that it would simplify matters when the time came. That I could remain in the house, he said, as long as it was practical. I set the can of wood stain on the counter. I told him that both properties were held in a legal structure that had been in place for over a decade and were not his to arrange. I told him I wanted them both out of my house by the end of the month. His wife appeared in the doorway behind him. She crossed her arms and looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you have not yet decided whether to keep. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was fortunate to have family nearby at my age. She said that if I refused to cooperate, they would consult a physician and explore their options under the Substitute Decisions Act. She mentioned that she had looked into capacity assessments in Ontario and was confident the process would resolve in their favor. I told her she was welcome to try. I picked up the wood stain and turned toward the basement stairs. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. My son stepped directly into my path. I do not know, even now, whether he intended for it to go as far as it did. We were standing at the top of the stairs. He put both hands against my chest and pushed. Not with great force. I do not think he intended great force. But I was already off balance with 1 foot on the top step, and the momentum was sufficient. I went backward into the stairwell. I do not remember the first 2 steps. I remember the third one catching the back of my ribs on the way down with a sound like a green branch breaking. I remember reaching for the railing and my wrist taking the full weight of my body as I struck the landing. The pain in my wrist was white and complete. The back of my head met the concrete floor. Everything narrowed to a point. I heard them at the top of the stairs. My son's voice was low and composed. He said something I will carry until I die. He said, "He's fine, leave him. He'll sleep it off and be more reasonable in the morning." His wife said nothing. I heard the door close. I heard the deadbolt, an old heavy mechanism I had installed myself 15 years before, engage from the hallway side. Then I heard them gathering things. Bags being dragged across the floor, car keys, the front door, his truck backing down the driveway. Then silence. They were going to his wife's sister's place at Blue Mountain for the weekend. I had heard them planning it at the dinner table the week before. They were driving up that night and returning Sunday evening. It was Thursday night. It was January in Ontario. The concrete under me was cold in the particular way Canadian concrete gets in winter. Not just cold at the surface, but cold in the way that carries through every layer, like touching the stone was touching the season itself. I lay still for a moment and took inventory. The wrist was fractured. I had been around enough construction sites to know what a fracture feels like from the inside. The ribs were cracked but not displaced. My head was ringing, but my vision was intact. I was not going to die on this floor. But I was not climbing those stairs on my own, and by morning the temperature in that basement would be what it was in November. I found my phone in my shirt pocket. The screen had a hairline crack across the corner, but it was working. I did not call 911 first. I called Oliver Crane. He answered on the second ring. Oliver is the kind of man who answers on the second ring at 9:30 on a Thursday night, without making you feel you have imposed on him. I told him where I was and what had happened. I kept my voice even. I told him to execute the contingency arrangement we had discussed and documented 6 months prior, the one we called the Clearwater Protocol, after the street I grew up on. I told him to initiate the irrevocable transfer of both properties into the family trust, activate the conduct clause in the holding company agreement, revoke my son's signing authority on every account connected to 4172 Ontario Holdings, and then call an ambulance to my address. Oliver did not ask unnecessary questions. He said, "I'll have the filings done before midnight. The ambulance comes first." I told him to give me 15 minutes. I needed to call the police non-emergency line myself while I was still conscious, so there was a record of the door and the names of the people who had left. He agreed. I ended the call. I spoke to a duty officer at the Guelph Police Service for 4 minutes. I described the locked door, my location, the deadbolt, the names of my son and his wife, where they had gone. The officer told me to call 911 immediately. I told him I was about to. I did. I woke up in Guelph General with a cast on my wrist, 2 taped ribs, a concussion they were monitoring, and Oliver Crane sitting in the chair beside my bed reading something on his phone. He looked up when I opened my eyes and said, "Clearwater is complete. Both properties are in the trust. The franchise agreement is in breach. His operating accounts are frozen, and there is already a police file with your call on record." I asked him what time it was. He said it was Saturday morning. I had been sedated for most of Friday. A detective had visited the room, Oliver told me, a plainclothes officer from the Guelph Police Service, with the particular economy of movement that people develop after years of reading rooms for a living. She had reviewed the non-emergency call transcript, the paramedics' report, and the responding officer's notes about the deadbolt, which had been photographed and documented. There was already a formal investigation file. I told Oliver I was not ready to make my full statement yet. He studied me the way he has for over 2 decades when he is deciding whether to push back on something. He asked how long I needed. I said, until Sunday evening. My son and his wife returned from Blue Mountain late Sunday afternoon. I know the timing because Oliver had arranged for a monitoring service to confirm when the truck pulled back into my driveway. I know what they did inside the house because of the cameras I had installed 18 months earlier. Nest cameras at the front door, back door, main hallway, basement landing, and garage. My son knew about the doorbell unit by the front entrance. He did not know about the others, which recorded directly to a cloud server I paid $22 a month to maintain. They walked in carrying ski bags and leftover resort food, and spent the first 15 minutes going through my things. My son went straight to the filing cabinet in the back room and worked through every folder. His wife photographed several documents with her phone. Then she sat at my kitchen table and spent 40 minutes on the website for a real estate law firm in Kitchener. They were not worried about me. They were preparing. On Sunday evening, the detective came to the door with a uniformed constable. My son answered with the smooth confidence of a man who had spent the weekend composing himself. He said he was relieved his father was recovering. He said the basement stairs had always been steep, and the door latch had always been unreliable. He said it with the particular calm of a rehearsed sentence. The detective spent 40 minutes in my house. Every word was recorded by the Nest cameras, still uploading to the cloud, still running on the subscription my son did not know I had. On Monday morning, Oliver played me the footage on a secured tablet. He also told me about the business accounts. My son had driven to a sandwich shop on Saturday morning, apparently cutting the Blue Mountain trip short once he could not reach me at the hospital, and discovered every business account was inaccessible. His corporate card had been canceled. His line of credit was frozen pending a holding company legal review. He had gone to the bank in person. They had shown him the legal notice filed by Oliver on behalf of 4172 Ontario Holdings Limited. He had not yet connected the numbered company to me. He hired a franchise litigation lawyer in Kitchener that afternoon, $2,000 on his personal credit card, and the lawyer reviewed the franchise agreement and called him back within the hour to say that the morality clause was clear, properly triggered, and that his situation was, in the lawyer's words, quite serious. My son still did not know who owned 4172 Ontario Holdings. He found out on Tuesday when Oliver's formal filings required full disclosure of corporate principles under Ontario's business registry. A numbered company's directors are a matter of public record. My son's lawyer pulled the filing as standard due diligence. He called my son at noon with the news. I was not present for that conversation, but I am an engineer. I understand the particular sensation of learning that something you believed was load-bearing turns out to have been resting on someone else's foundation the entire time. The business he had introduced himself by at dinner parties for 3 years. The investor he had described as a major private fund that had recognized his potential, the capital that had made everything possible. It had all been me, under my terms, subject to my conditions. And by leaving me on that concrete floor, he had triggered every one of those conditions simultaneously. On Wednesday, a process server delivered eviction documents to my house. Because the property had been transferred into the family trust before any counterfiling, there was no ownership dispute. The trust held clear title. My son and his wife had 72 hours to vacate the premises. His wife called the hospital. A nurse told me afterward. She identified herself as my primary caregiver and demanded to be connected to the attending physician to authorize a capacity assessment under the Healthcare Consent Act. She said she had done her research on the process. The nurse checked the file and explained that my medical power of attorney had been transferred to Oliver Crane on Monday morning, executed before an independent notary, and that my file carried a privacy designation preventing disclosure of any information to family members pending the active police review. My son's wife asked to speak to Oliver directly. Oliver did not return her call. On Thursday morning, 8 days after I had been carried out of that basement, Oliver discharged me from the hospital into a private rehabilitation facility in Fergus. I left through the service exit at 6 in the morning. I told no one at the hospital where I was going. I spent 9 days in Fergus. A physiotherapist worked with me on the wrist twice a day. I slept more than I had in years. Oliver drove up twice with documents. I signed what needed signing. My son's lawyer sent 3 letters. Oliver responded to each with a single paragraph, confirming that the holding company's legal position was sound, and that the eviction notice stood. On the 9th day, Oliver called to tell me my son and his wife had vacated the house. They had taken things that did not belong to them: a television, 2 pieces of furniture, a box of tools from the workshop. Oliver had already arranged for an inventory specialist to document the missing items for the police file. They were staying with her parents in Cambridge. My son had no business income. The franchise license had been suspended pending the franchisor's own conduct review, a process that typically concluded with permanent revocation. His personal credit card was at its limit. The numbered company held a claim against any future assets he acquired until the investment was fully repaid. He was 34 years old with a suspended business, an active criminal investigation file, and no fixed address. He had become, in 8 days, the thing he had always quietly been afraid of becoming, a man who needed someone else's help just to get through the week. I came home on a Friday afternoon in February. The physiotherapist drove me. The house was cold from being empty, but intact. I stood in the front hall for a moment and looked at the mirror his wife had hung on the mantel where my late wife's photographs used to sit. I carried it to the garage. I brought the photographs back and set each one in its place on the shelf. That took 22 minutes, and it was the most satisfying work I had done in a long time. The police file stayed open through the winter. My son was interviewed twice. His wife was interviewed once. In March, the Crown reviewed the full evidence package: my non-emergency call from the basement floor, the duty officer's notes, the paramedic's report, the forensic photographs of the deadbolt mechanism, and the Nest camera footage from the basement landing, and determined that grounds existed to proceed with charges. My son was charged under Section 245 of the Criminal Code for criminal negligence causing bodily harm. His wife was named as a party to the offense. Both were additionally charged under Ontario's elder abuse provisions for the financial coercion. The documents pushed across my kitchen counter, the threats about capacity assessments, the photographs of my financial files taken on that Sunday evening, all of it documented. At the hearing, my son's lawyer entered a guilty plea on a reduced charge in exchange for a suspended sentence, 2 years of probation, and 150 hours of community service. His wife received a conditional discharge on the criminal charges, but was named as a defendant in the civil proceeding Oliver filed on behalf of the trust, a proceeding that resulted in a judgment against her for the value of the items removed from my property, plus full legal costs. I know people will want more than that. I understand the feeling. The sentence does not match what was left on that concrete floor. Our legal system is what it is, and I do not have the energy left to rage against the architecture of it. But here is what else is true. The franchise company completed their review in April and revoked the license permanently. The strip mall landlord relet the space within 6 weeks. My son's name is now in the franchisor's non-renewal registry, which means he cannot apply for another location under that brand or any affiliated brand under the parent company's umbrella. The business identity he carried for 3 years is gone completely and will not come back. The civil judgment will surface on any financial background check for years. It will attach to any property he tries to buy, any business he tries to license, any line of credit he tries to open. His name appears on a police record of charges that will follow him through every professional background check, every bonding application, every licensing proceeding for the foreseeable future. He was 34 when this happened. He will be carrying that record when he is 50. The house is mine. The trust holds it cleanly. The Georgian Bay property I have decided to sell, not because I need the money, but because I am finished preserving things for people who have not earned the preservation. I am sitting in my front room as I write this. It is a Monday morning in October. The maple in the front yard has gone the color of old brickwork. I made coffee before I sat down, dark roast, no sugar, the way I have made it for 30 years. My late wife's photographs are on the shelf where they belong. I did not want any of this to happen. I want to say that plainly. Because I think people sometimes assume a story like this one means the father was looking for a reason to burn everything down. I was not. I loved my son in the ordinary way that fathers love their children, not perfectly, not without frustration, but completely and without condition. I paid for his university. I drove through a January ice storm to help him when his car died on the 401. I sat with him in the emergency room when he broke his collarbone at 26, and I held his hand until the painkiller took hold, because that is what you do. But there is a moment in a relationship when you understand that the love you are giving is no longer being returned in kind. When the person looking back at you has begun to calculate what you are worth and how long until they can collect. I reached that moment at the top of my basement stairs. The man who raised his son on Sunday mornings and minor hockey and long summer drives up to Georgian Bay did not survive that fall. He died on the concrete floor of his own house. The man who left that hospital was made of the same materials arranged differently, quieter, colder, and finished with the kind of generosity that waits for nothing back. I am not angry anymore. That surprised me. I thought I would be. Anger is what I expected, like a bill coming due. But anger requires something unresolved, and there is nothing unresolved here. The accounts are settled, the properties are clear, the records exist and will exist long after I am gone. If anyone is listening who has a son or a daughter or a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law who has begun to look at them the way my son looked at me across that kitchen counter, with that particular flatness behind the eyes that means they have stopped seeing a person and started seeing an asset, do not wait. Speak to a lawyer now, before you are standing at the top of any stairs. Structure your affairs properly, not in the hopeful assumption that family will always be family, because family is not always family, and a handshake is not a contract. The documents that protected me were signed years before I needed them. The camera footage that condemned them was recorded by a system they did not know existed. The clause that emptied their accounts was buried in an agreement they signed without reading. None of it was luck. All of it was patience. And if you are already on the floor, already in the dark, already in the cold, wondering if anyone is coming, I want you to know that one call, made clearly and early, can reach further than you can imagine. They locked that door, believing they had the final word. They did not. I did.